As you may already know, starting a new fantasy world can be very overwhelming, especially when comparing yourself to other world builders. When I started out, I often looked at other people's worlds and instantly wanted mine to be the same level of detail and have the same amount of lore. But world building takes time, and it often takes years to build these things up. Today, we're going to talk about some things I wish I did differently when I started my own fantasy world called Hexium. And I know I titled this video Mistakes, but there really are no mistakes in world building. It's more so changes that I've made to my creative process or how I changed my outlook on world building as a whole, but I really didn't know how to condense that into a small title. But anyway, let's get into it. A huge problem for me at first is that I thought I couldn't have a world without it following an overarching plot line. Every single character was kind of serving as a cog in the grand plot machine rather than having their own individual identity, and it was just not the way to go. And to be honest, at the time, I was just an artist and not that great of a storyteller. Eventually, I stopped putting all this pressure on creating this overarching plot and just worked on building up the world itself. I started viewing my characters as actual inhabitants of my world instead of just advancements in a storyline. This meant I started considering the cultures and their lifestyle and all of those type of things, and I very quickly realized that not all worlds have to have a grand overarching plot. There can be many stories within one world. So I very quickly took a different direction, and I decided Hexium was a world full of stories, not just one of them. And this was a much more enjoyable approach for me in general. I enjoy having this list of never-ending ideas that I can just keep expanding upon and building upon, and it just never ends. Albeit sometimes this can be a little bit more overwhelming because I have endless ideas that I want to get around to and a lot of unfinished products. But I thought this was important to talk about because I think narrative can be where a lot of people get stuck in building their worlds. I think if you're struggling or hyperfixating on the story too much, it can really benefit you to just really hone in on the cultures and the characters of your world and think about it from that perspective instead. Once you start considering how life works, then the stories will pop up more naturally to you and they'll just kind of write themselves. And this isn't to say having one big cohesive plotline is a bad thing. A lot of people are more narrative based, and there are a lot of world builders that stick to writing more so than art. But yeah, that part really didn't come naturally to me at first, so I really recommend going with what feels best for you. And I suppose this could work inversely as well. If you're more of a storyteller and not an artist, then maybe work on the story and fill in the blanks as you go, and you'll start to realize how quickly these things pile up. So the next thing that I want to talk about kind of flows from the first part, but basically when I first began, I kind of pictured myself having this huge audience, and I felt like I couldn't change anything because of it. Because of this mindset, I felt like everything I did about my world was like set in stone and final. Basically, once everything was done, it's done. And that's problematic because I became better at world building over time, and I had room to change things for the better. Once I thought of somebody's origin story, that was it. No room for improvement later on. And yeah, basically in my head, I was like, all these people are watching me, and they weren't. I didn't have any audience except for my friends that I did art with. And I felt like if there was any kind of inconsistency in my lore or world, that it was just going to be the end of the world. And then at the end of the day, it would actually hold me back from creating things because I felt this huge pressure every single time I was making a decision around my world. So yeah, basically, I was treating Hexium like it had some kind of insane Star Wars level fan base that had read all the novels and were going to call out every single inconsistency that I made around it. The fact is, the more world building that you do, or the more writing, or the more drawing, the better you are going to get at it. So if your world can change for the better, then you should absolutely take the opportunity to do that. And to be honest, even if you do have a little bit of an audience, I didn't. Changing ideas is not the worst thing in the world. You would be surprised how many people follow you along to see the process as well. Especially if it's other world builders, a lot of people like to see that kind of transparency. So yeah, my first two parts just kind of demonstrated the unnecessary pressure I put on myself from the get-go, and I know a lot of people feel the same, so I wanted to talk about those things. Alright, so this takes a bit of a different turn from the last two parts, and it is a very important one. As you continue to expand your world for whatever duration of time that you work on it, the more and more the little facts and tidbits of knowledge and lore will start to build up. I think it's really, really important to have some sort of archive that helps keep all of this information organized. I really didn't do this well at all at first, and I would often forget my own lore or not be able to go and find sketches on things that I wanted to improve on later on. Yeah, overall, just a huge pain. This all changed when I made my website, and this is just how I do my system, but I'll show how I did that now. So this is kind of my portfolio / website, how people can kind of explore Hexium, and I divide it all into separate pages. One of them is dedicated to my characters, where you can click on their icons and read about their biographies and just look at art that I've made about them. If you check this out, My website's currently under a bit of development. I've got lots of characters to add, but I lost access to Adobe, which is how I made their little biographies before. And then after that, I have a Places tab, which is where a bulk of my information is. Hexium has 4 nations, and I really like to make sure each one of them is built up to the same standard. Is that the case right now? No, not really, but it will be. So I've got subsections for notable places, cuisine, local fauna, and the characters that live there. This is something I would definitely love to expand on later on. I really want to do cultural fashion, plants alongside my animals, and different holidays and things like that. But this is it for now. But yeah, it just really helped me organize my cultures, and now there's a dedicated area anytime I need to go and reference something from that region. And then the last section is my comics section, and that's where my comics will go, but I only have one of them because they take so long to make. And a website isn't necessary, by the way. This is just how I choose to do it because I need a website as an artist, and I wanted all of Hexium's information to be accessible. You can have your own private place for this, even if it's just a PowerPoint or notes in a notebook. I just think it needs a dedicated space where you can go and find all this information easily. And you will thank yourself later on when you start building on different projects and you can go and reference these things. If you've watched my previous videos, then you probably knew this point was coming one way or another. I am an advocate for whimsy and childlike wonder and a little bit of nonsense when it comes to world building. When I first started, I definitely felt a lot of pressure to make sure everything made sense from a logical sense, and I really had a lot more fun when I broke outside of that. But yeah, I really tried to make sure I followed the same rules as like Earth when it came to things like naming conventions, geography, and travel routes, and all that kind of stuff. Everyone's world is different and has drastically different factors that can affect each and every aspect of your world. My outlook kind of changed when I decided that whatever I wanted to happen was gonna happen in my world, and then I would come up with a way to make sure that that could happen. For example, my favorite city in Hexium is Eugosus, and it is a mountain city in the highest peaks. It is nowhere near the coastline. All the rivers that run through it are completely frozen, and the mountains are absolutely treacherous to travel through. But I really wanted to have a city just up high in the highest peaks of Hexium. And at the time, I really didn't know how I was going to come up with a logical way for the people to travel in and out of the city. And I had 2 choices. One of them was to play into that isolationism trope that you see a lot of times in media, kind of like Wakanda from Black Panther. Or I could just come up with a fun and wacky solution that would work around this. So I created a native creature called the Cloud Paca, which is just an alpaca made out of clouds that could easily traverse up and down the mountain by floating with sleighs and people and all that kind of stuff. And that is just one example of what I mean when I say every creative problem has a creative solution. But I think finding the fun ways around things kind of makes the world more fun and memorable in the long run. Alright, this is my final piece of advice. And that is to explore different exercises and different methods of world building. Everything I made at first was digital art. I drew characters and creatures on white backgrounds and then called it a day. But I seriously unlocked so much more about my world by just being a bit more experimental in my approach to world building. And I think the most effective exercises are when you make objects that feel as if they can be pulled straight out of your world. And some examples of what I mean by this are making menus from fantasy restaurants, make travel brochures that show off the different places and landmarks in your countries, create animal spotting guides that show off all the local fauna, and just things of that sort. These exercises sound simple, but while you're making them, you start to think of so many other little intricate details in your world that you wouldn't really consider otherwise. And I think it could just be really immersive to be able to hold something that the characters in your world might have, or it just feels like a prop pulled straight out of it. I think making tangible crafts is really good for your mind and soul too, and it's just made me a more well-rounded creator. If you need inspiration for some exercises to try, I made a whole video on some world building exercises that are a bit out of the box. I'll link that in the description. Anyways, that about sums it up. I hope this video helped bring a little bit of a different perspective to world building, and if any of y'all have any other comments you want to add, please do share, and we can all help each other out a little bit. So yeah, my next few videos, I'm going to make one on fantasy environments and making key places, and I'm also going to make one around building a fantasy nation, and that one just might take a little bit longer because I am creating new art specifically for it so that I can explain my process as I'm doing it. But as always, if there's any specific world building content you'd like to see, please feel free to comment. It really helps me a lot. But yeah, thank you all as always, and I'll see you again soon.